In summary, caffeine is one of those substances that is best taken strictly in moderation. There is some evidence that at such a level, around 3 cups of instant coffee per day, it has quite a good antidepressant effect. Much more, and you really need to be cutting down, back to around that daily level of 3 cups. If you are drinking an excessive amount of coffee, and I've come across people who drink 30 cups a day, the best way of cutting down is first of all to halve your current consumption. Then hold that level steady for a week or two, then halve it again. Then hold that level for a week or two and halve it again if necessary, keeping going until you get to around 3 cups a day. You may well find it surprisingly difficult to cut back, because although most people don't think they are addicted to the amount of caffeine they consume, you probably are. Common withdrawal symptoms include painful headaches and tiredness, although in total it appears that caffeine depletes your energy levels rather than boosts them. Some people who have headaches first thing in the morning or at weekends find that they are associated with caffeine withdrawal because naturally enough one doesn't normally consume caffeine through the night, and many people drink a lot more caffeine during the working week than at weekends. In summary then, limit yourself to around 3 cups of instant coffee or its equivalent each day, and even then don't have one of those in the evening time or it will probably interfere with your sleep. Pretty much the same applies to alcohol. In moderation it's fine, but in excess it's really troublesome. Recommended weekly maxima in the UK are currently 21 units for men and 14 units for women, where a unit is roughly equivalent to a glass of wine, half a pint of beer, or a measure of spirits. Current US recommendations are for a slightly lower intake. The Connecticut Clearinghouse, a program of Wheeler Clinic funded by the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Service, says that moderate drinking should not be exceeded and defines moderate intake as 1 drink a day for females and 2 drinks a day for males, where 1 drink is equivalent to 1.5 ounces of distilled spirit, 80% proof, 5 ounces of wine or 12 ounces of regular beer. Personally, although I confess to being rather fond of drinking, I expect that the UK maxima will be lowered in due course. Anyway, if you drink much more than this and also find yourself troubled by irritability, then you really need to work hard at getting down to these limits as a maximum. The real problem with alcohol is that it interferes with your sleep. Contrary to popular belief, the chances are that your quality of sleep is actually impaired rather than improved by consuming alcohol. Obviously, taken in large amounts it leaves you hungover, and taken even in not very great amounts it still leaves you under par the next day, partly because it attacks your supply of vitamin B. It's no real answer, but if you are drinking too much alcohol and find it very difficult to cut it down to reasonable levels, then at least make sure that you take regular multivitamin supplements. Clearly this is not half as good as not damaging yourself in the first place, but it does go some way to undoing part of the damage. Alcohol project. This one is clear and simple. Get down to the recommended maxima of alcohol per week. Obviously this is a very important one, not only because of the implications for your irritability, but also in terms of minimizing the damage alcohol does to your liver and brain especially. If you can manage this by yourself, simply by starting up a new habit of drinking a lot less, then so much to the good. If you need some outside help, it's worth getting it. Your family doctor might be able to recommend somebody, or you can get in touch with Alcoholics Anonymous. Local contact numbers are in the phone book. You don't have to be drinking as much as you think in order to get help for them. Recreational street drugs. This category covers a great many drugs, and I am not expert on any of them, so I don't propose to say too much here. I would rather leave it to your own judgment. Given what we have said above about the routine drugs of caffeine and alcohol and the damaging effects that they have been proved to inflict upon us, you can probably judge for yourself what effect other drugs might be having on you, if you are taking any, and what you had best do about it. Sleep. The importance of sleep is very difficult to overstate. If you can get into the routine of having a good night's sleep, then this will have a major impact on the quality of your mood. There are a number of rules, many of which have been mentioned already. Get up at a regular time, the body likes routine. Eat at regular times, again the body likes routine. Avoid too much caffeine, not more than around 3 cups of instant coffee per day, and too much alcohol, not more than 3 units per day if you're a man, 2 if you're a woman. Get a reasonable amount of physical and mental activity into your day. Try to break the vicious circle of feeling tired, therefore not doing much, therefore not sleeping very well, and therefore feeling tired. Have a wind-down period before you go to bed, a low-activity routine so that you go to bed relaxed. Make sure you're neither too hungry nor too full when you go to bed. Ensure that you have a regular bedtime. Again, the body likes routine. Some people find they are able to induce a state of happiness as they lie in bed. If you can do this, it's a good idea. Happy people sleep better than unhappy ones. Make sure you've got rid of any extraneous sudden noises from central heating or anything else, and that you are warm enough but not too hot. Well, that isn't exactly a fully comprehensive account of how to reform your sleeping habits, but it's a fair start. If you really make sure that you are doing all of those all at once, then you shouldn't be sleeping too badly at all. Only one other thing, don't try to sleep. Even if you just lie there awake but relaxed all night, your brain will go into a different mode and you'll have a reasonable amount of rest, so long as you don't actually harass yourself with trying to sleep. Sleep project. Regardless of whether you think of yourself as having sleep problems, it is still an excellent idea to get as good a night's sleep as possible. The importance of a good night's sleep is very difficult to overestimate. Therefore, apply your mind to implementing as many of the above points as you can, including settling realistic times for bedtime and getting up time in order to ensure that you have enough time in bed but not too much. Of course, if your work shifts, then this can be a tremendous problem. Some people seem to be able to manage shift work quite easily, others not. In either cases, do make sure that you get straight into the new routine as soon as your shift changes. The body isn't normally too upset about occasional changes in the routine, so long as you then stick to it for a substantial period of time. Other people simply cannot tolerate, for example, night shift work. If you're one of those, then you might have to take more radical measures like moving on to a job that doesn't entail night working. Come what may, make sure you do everything in your power to get a good night's sleep. Illness. If you are going through a period of illness, then the chances are that this will affect your mood. There may not, of course, be a lot you can do about this. Let's assume in any event that you are doing all you can in terms of overcoming the illness, regardless of whether it's short-term or long-term, physical or mental. What we are interested in here is your levels of and tendency towards irritability and anger. In that respect, there is one major thing you can do, namely when you find a person who's irritating you and you suspect it may be because of your illness, make sure you lay the blame fair and square on your illness, not on the person. There is a very important general rule here. It is always good to lay the blame fair and square where it belongs, rather than dumping it on some poor unfortunate who happens to be nearby. There is just one illness I'd like us to look at more carefully, because it is so often associated with irritability and anger, and that illness is a mental one, namely depression. Depression. My friend and colleague, Paul Gilbert, has written an extremely good book on overcoming depression in this series. However, just for the moment, rather than embark on reading a completely new book, allow me to give you a few tips. That is all they are, but just see if any of these fit your needs. Think less, do more. Thinking is one of the great traps in depression. Many people, when they find themselves feeling low, indulge in 2 types of unhelpful thinking. First, they dwell on and brood over their problems, and second, they introspect. In other words, they think too much about where they might be going wrong. As a general rule, too much thinking doesn't do us any good. Effectively, it digs us deeper into the swamp we are trying to climb out of. Action, on the other hand, is usually helpful. It doesn't particularly matter what the action is. Doing things of any sort seems to be a good idea. Envisage a future you want, regardless of whether you are thinking short-term or long-term, next weekend or 10 years hence. Looking forward to a good future is a powerful antidepressant. Have a clear picture of what it is you want, write it down, or draw pictures of what you're after. But whatever you do, make sure that you have really clear images of the future that you want and how you might obtain it. And do it regularly. It's not a once and for all activity. When you do think, be careful what you think about. Sometimes people spend time thinking about things that make them unhappy. Sometimes the connection is obvious. Thinking about sad things makes most people unhappy. Sometimes it is less obvious. You might, for example, spend time thinking about a good relationship you used to have, but when you stop thinking about it, find that you have become unhappy. Try to be aware of what effect your thoughts have on you, and spend less time thinking about things that make you unhappy, and more time thinking about things that make you happy. Get yourself a good routine with plenty of exercise and sleep, good nutrition and limited unhelpful drugs. We have probably said enough about this one, but if you get all those things right, you're off to a terrific start. Act as if you are happy and relaxed. The way we walk, sit, stand and talk gives signals to the brain about how we are. So it's a good idea to send non-depressed signals to the brain. Try an experiment if you want. Normally, if you're feeling down, you'll be sitting in a depressed kind of way. If somebody came in and saw you, they'd say you look depressed. So right now, sit in a non-depressed way. Very quickly, almost immediately, you'll feel the difference. It is very difficult to sit non-depressed and yet feel depressed. If you act as if you're perfectly happy and relaxed, your brain will, to a degree, follow your lead. Have a good day. Life consists of a series of days. If you can make each one reasonably good, then you will have a rewarding life. Of course, most days involve some things we don't really want to do, and other things we do want to do. The best slogan here is, do the worst first. That way you're always on the downhill run, each thing leading on to something better. If you do it the other way round, you are constantly being punished for everything you do. Also beware of trying to plan things that will make you happy. You are probably onto a loser here. Happiness is an elusive quality. The more you chase it, the more it runs away from you. It's maybe better to plan things that you think are right, or possibly even things that will make you feel good about yourself. Sort out your environment. Sometimes when I call on people who have been depressed for a while, I look at where they live and think it's no wonder they're depressed. Any reasonable person living there would be depressed, and it's not usually anything to do with money. It's just a badly organised environment. There are 3 key principles. Number 1, have things so you feel safe, you're not going to trip up, electrocute yourself, bump into sharp corners, etc. Number 2, have things so you are comfortable, chairs, beds, table, work surfaces. Number 3, have things around you that you like and that make you feel good and relaxed, specific furniture, pictures, colours, etc. Take this further if you want. Watch and listen to television and radio programmes that make you feel good rather than bad. Listen to music that makes you feel upbeat rather than down, and so on. Sort out your social life. Most people are social beings, so it's important to have this area reasonably well sorted. In the first place, intimate relationships are very important to us, so if you have one, it's important to do your level best to make it as good as it can be. Work at developing a good relationship with your partner. For some people this isn't very good, but just get it to its maximum. One word of warning, if you are depressed, you tend to be depressed with your partner. in just the same way as you're probably also depressed with your house, job, car, etc. This does not mean that your partner is necessarily causing your depression. Of course he or she may be, but be cautious. Think carefully before you do or say anything to precipitate. Non-intimate relationships are important too. Make them as good as you can, but make them real relationships. In other words, to paraphrase President Kennedy, ask not what your friends can do for you, but what you can do for your friends. Humans have a rather good design feature whereby if you follow that maxim, your friends benefit a lot, and so do you. It's a question of cultivating a real interest in your friends, rather than using them to provide yourself with a social life. Gentle up on yourself. Sometimes people can be really hard on themselves when they are depressed. In fact, sometimes it is the act of being so hard on themselves that causes the depression. They make rules for themselves that are rigid, extreme, and overgeneralized rules like, I've got to be loved by everybody, and I've got to be 100% perfect in everything I do. And it's terrible if things aren't just the way I want them to be. To lighten up on yourself, soften these rules to it is nice to have some people who like me, but I can't be liked by everybody. It is nice to do things right, but sometimes things are less than perfect. I'd sooner have things go the way I want them, but then again that's not always the way life is. The rules we make for ourselves are often almost unconscious, so sometimes we really have to work hard on softening them up. Depression project. If you feel you are depressed and your irritability is caused by your depression, then clearly what you need to do is sort your depression out. The points listed above are probably highly relevant for you. You need to go about tackling them methodically. In other words, choose just one of the factors above and really go to town on that one for the next week or two. And then choose another, and then another, until you've covered all the ones that you feel are relevant to you. This is a good major project, because clearly it will make you happier and less irritable. Indeed, it can be little short of life transforming. If you want to do a more comprehensive job on your depression, then embark on Paul Gilbert's Overcoming Depression, or David D. Bum's The Feeling Good Handbook, both of which are excellent guides to escaping from depression. Alternatively, or in addition, you can also go along to your doctor and get antidepressants if you haven't already got them and feel that you need them. Modern-day antidepressants are absolutely excellent, and very often you can get the best effect by combining antidepressants with a psychological intervention like that described above or those outlined in the books I've recommended. In any case, it's an absolute shame for you to go through life depressed, so set yourself a real project to resolve it. It can be done, even if you've been depressed for ages. A tip. Remember whether your illness is depression or some other affliction, maybe a physical condition. Develop the habit whenever you feel irritable of blaming the illness, not the person who seems to be causing the irritation. Life stresses. Stressful life events come in at least two sorts. Repetitive stresses such as overwork, and once-off events such as bereavement and divorce. Both can affect our mood substantially. Let's take the repetitive stresses first of all. We are talking here about things such as overwork, demanding family members, such as difficult children or having to look after an aging parent, or demanding friends who need your attention. Any one of these can become overwhelming, or pressure from two or more together can add up to the point where it has a serious effect on your mood. There are 3 things you can do. Reduce the stresses, learn to cope with the stresses better, view the stresses in a different light. We'll look at these briefly in turn in a moment, but before we do, there is one other important point to be made. Again, as with illness, if you are feeling irritable because you are stressed out, make sure you put the blame fairly and squarely where it belongs. In other words, on the stressor, overwork, or whatsoever it happens to be. Don't displace it onto whoever happens to be closest to hand. Take Ken, for example, our stressed-out executive. Ken is under stress because of his work, not his home life. Even so, because he's stressed, when he goes home to his wife, Trish, he is irritable. This means that almost anything that Trish does irritates Ken, not because she is irritating, but because he is irritable. So Ken had to learn to snap not at Trish, but at his workload. He did this rather clumsily at first. Trish would say something like, "What should we do for dinner tonight?" And Ken, rather than replying, "I don't care," in an irritable way, had to teach himself to say, "All the stuff going on at work is getting me down." This was pretty strange to Trish at first, because it is a rather odd reply to "What should we do for dinner tonight?" Nevertheless, Ken got better at it, and eventually was able to say it quietly to himself, making the point that he was stressed out not by Trish but by his work. Further down the line, he reduced his work pressures, which was of course the long-term solution. What I'm trying to say is, blame what deserves to be blamed rather than the person in front of you. Then better still, sort out the underlying problem. So here goes. The first course of action was to reduce the stresses. Most people's first response to this is easier said than done, and there is some truth in that. For example, one woman I saw, Alison, had her mother living a few doors down from her, and the mother, for very good reasons, needed frequent attention. Alison said there was no way that she could give her mother any less attention than she did, so how could she possibly reduce the pressures on her? And she seemed to be correct. Her mother really did seem to need the attention described. However, as we talked, I learnt that Alison was A, holding down a fairly demanding job, B, coming home to a husband and 2 children and setting about making a traditional evening meal from scratch, and C, then going off to give her mother the attention she needed. In fact, she also managed to fit in a brief visit to her mother between coming home and setting about making the meal. So although she had to continue to give her mother the same amount of attention, Alison could reduce the pressures on herself in other areas. She chose to cut down on the sheer amount of work involved in making the meal. She couldn't quite bring herself to delegate it to her husband, but she did go for convenience food, and that brought her total workload down to a manageable level. Stress Project 1. If you know you're being stressed out by too many pressures, examine the total pressures you are under and do anything you can to reduce that total. The principal pressure may be unalterable, or alterable only to a small degree. Don't be put off by that. Work on some of the other pressures you are under. Also, beware of blocking yourself by assuming that the major pressure is unalterable. Frequently it isn't, even when it seems to be. Do some careful analysis and see where you can de-stress yourself. The second course of action we looked at was learning to cope with stresses better. By this I mean you don't change the number or quantity of stresses affecting you, you simply act differently. I feel that here I should start telling you about time management, self-instructional training and so forth. On the other hand, I don't know enough about what particular stresses you are under to make such a discussion directly relevant to you, so I will just suggest this. Try to clarify in your mind exactly what the stresses are, which can be more difficult than at first sight seems. Then ask several people you know how they cope with those stresses. For example, if you get stressed out by putting 2 youngsters to bed, neither of whom wants to go, and both of whom are liable to be naughty in 101 different ways, ask someone else you know how they cope with it. It doesn't have to be a contemporary of yours, though it can be if you prefer. It might be someone rather older who knows what they would do if they had their time again. If you are stressed out by having 3 deadlines to meet and being aware that it is impossible to meet all 3, ask somebody else who finds themselves in a similar situation what they do. If you are stressed out by having an over-energetic friend who always wants to drag you off to the latest new and exciting place, ask somebody else in a similar situation how they cope with that. Again, it does not have to be an exact parallel. The person you ask might have a friend who is always burdening them with their problems, but's found a method for coping with that. Maybe you could still tailor their solution to your own situation. If you are stressed out by being jobless, wanting a job and having too much time on your hands, again ask other people in the same situation how they cope. Possibly, just possibly, you might be able to put together a solution from the various answers you receive. Stress Project 2. If you feel this is a relevant area for you, do your own research project on how you might cope better with the stresses affecting you. This method hinges on being able to identify very clearly what it is that is stressing you. Being able to conduct a survey of 1 or more people who might be able to offer you a solution or a partial solution. Putting together a personal plan that suits your own situation. Having the determination to implement that personal plan. The third solution we had to life's stresses was to view them in a different way. Perhaps you'll excuse a personal example. Just now, even as I write this, I know that I am past the deadline for submitting this book. In fact, I am past the 3rd deadline set by the publisher, and I think her patience is wearing thin. But then I can't worry too much about that because I have a whole string of people who would like me to run training courses for their organisations, and I know I am going to disappoint some of them. And then having faced the wrath of the publisher about this book and disappointed people who want me to run training courses, I know I'm still way behind on writing up 3 medico-legal reports. Reports where I have interviewed a patient and am submitting my professional opinion to the court. So if I had any sense at all, I should be completely stressed out, pulled in 3 directions at once, quite apart from all the little extras, like a journalist just having phoned up, wanting to know if I have any opinions as to why knitting has suddenly taken off in popularity, what is therapeutic about it, and why women do it more than men. And of course there is a part of me that feels stressed by all of that, but not a very big part, because most of me is thoroughly delighted that A publisher would give me money just for saying I will write a book, B, so many people are keen for me to run courses for their organisations, and C, so many solicitors want me to give my opinions on their clients. The knitting question is quite interesting too. As I'm sure you know, this is known as reframing, which simply means seeing the same situation from a different viewpoint. All the stresses are still there, just as they were previously. It's just that they've not viewed as stresses any longer. They're viewed as compliments. The hurdle you have to get over to use this strategy is that there is a little voice in the back of the head that says you shouldn't be so complacent. In my case, that really I should be stressed out by all the things I haven't done and work my socks off until I have caught up. Well, possibly, but the argument against that is that such stress is actually counterproductive and means you work less well and achieve what you're trying to achieve more slowly and less successfully. Let's have another example. I have a friend who has a soft spot for Bangladesh. He has a tremendous amount of empathy for the Bangladeshis and the sufferings they endure by way of floods, storms, and winds. He is constantly devastated by the number of people who lose their lives in the country, the amount of suffering that goes on there, and he sends regular sums of money to aid programs associated with Bangladesh. However, he is far from solemn about this serious concern, and whenever he hits a problem says, compared with the problems they have in Bangladesh, this is no problem at all. And although he says it in a flippant kind of way, it clearly has a major impact on his thinking. It is his way of reframing his own problems. Obviously, this is simply a variant on the time-honoured admonition. There are plenty of people worse off than you. However, it is a very good variant for my friend because it is so much more specific. My friend really does envisage in his own mind trying to explain his problem to somebody in Bangladesh and how minor and trivial his own problem would seem to them. Very convincing reframing. Reframing project. Reframing is a very powerful tool if you can get into it. It has the power to transform a situation quickly and permanently if you're prepared to undertake it. Use the examples given above to see if there's a parallel in your own situation. How could you reframe your own situation? Note, this is not just an intellectual exercise. Once you have worked out how it is possible to reframe your own situation, you then have to go ahead and do it. Get yourself in the habit of seeing your situation from this new viewpoint. Social factors. Being social animals, we humans are greatly affected in our moods by how our social lives are progressing. There are 3 major areas we have to consider. Our most intimate relationships, with our partners if we are adults, more probably with peers, parents or carers if we are children. Social relationships at work or wherever we occupy ourselves. Social relationships outside of intimate and work ones, namely with friends and neighbours, etc. To maintain a good long-term mood, we need to nurture each of these 3 areas as best we can, not just using other people to provide ourselves with a social life, but taking a genuine interest in others to give ourselves a solid social foundation. Inevitably, however, things go wrong in one area or another. For example, you might have trouble with your relationship at work, with your boss, with colleagues, with clients or whoever. The most common mistake is this instance to come home and be snappy with those at home. In other words, you transfer problems from one area into a second area, immediately doubling the problem. An alternative habit is just as easy to get into. We have to take it as given that problems do sometimes arise, so that inevitably there will sometimes be difficulties in relationships at work. For example, it is then a question of disciplining ourselves to switch into a different gear when we get home, a gear that appreciates the support of those with whom we live, or at least one that takes us into a totally different mode at home from that prevailing at work. And the same applies the other way around. There are sometimes problems at home that don't need to be transferred to work or friendships. When one area temporarily goes down, we need to make sure we don't contaminate the other 2 areas. This is exactly the trap that Georgina was walking into. She was a teenager who was depressed and irritable because she had repeated problems with her boyfriends. So at home she would be snappy with her parents and her brother because of the boyfriend trouble. In this way, she was alienating the very people who would naturally have provided her with support. Georgina was a particularly interesting instance to me because she grasped this concept straight away. This was very satisfying to me as a therapist counsellor because I could see the immediate impact of her recognition. Immediately Georgina realised what she was doing. She acted upon the idea that the times when she was sad about her boyfriend's situation were the very times when she should put more energy into her good domestic situation and the good relationship she had with other friends. Social project. The project in this area has two parts. First, if necessary, build your social support in the 3 areas of intimate relationships: work relationships if you go to work, and relationships outside of work, and intimacy such as those with neighbours and other friends. Second, be constantly aware of the trap of displacing trouble from one of the 3 areas into another, and thereby doubling or trebling your trouble. Skirt your way round this trap by acting upon the realisation that when you have trouble in one of the 3 areas, this is the very time to lean on and nurture the other 2 areas.